One of the things that I've noticed is that as much as parents nowadays, all over the internet, a lot of the LGBT community, some prominent transsexuals that I am acquainted with, and a lot of mothers and women are coming out right now to fight against this new transgender activism that is going on. That, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, is causing tremendous harm to the transgender community. It's causing harm to all of my transsexual friends and their acceptance levels, and it is causing harm to the LGBT community in general. So what I wanted to discuss was basically what I believe is Big Pharma's major role in this. They're one of the major donors to almost every political organization on the planet. Almost every politician, almost every organization, they just are infiltrated. All of these private organizations that make money off of surgery and medication and whatever they can do to get just a bit more money out of you, they will do. This is not new. This has been going on for a long time. And I'm actually living proof of that. In 1997, I had gone through a phase of my teenage years. I was 16. And I had gotten into quite a rebellious stage. I was in an abusive household, and all I wanted to do at that point was leave it. That's it. That's all I wanted. And so I began to run away quite a bit. When I could not go to my grandparents' house and stay there, when I could not go visit my father and stay there, I would run away. My mother decided the best thing to do would be to call the authorities and get me involuntarily placed into a mental hospital. Well, that kind of backfired on her, because then I figured out I had a third option. Besides running away, I could pretend to be ill and go to a mental hospital for a week and be away from her. I took advantage. I had been diagnosed back then with bipolar 1. Now, here's the interesting part about the bipolar diagnosis. I had never been depressed. I had never experienced depression. As the years went on, I still had never experienced depression. And unfortunately, that is a qualification to diagnose somebody with bipolar disorder. Now, they said that my habit of staying up for 3 days at a time, if I felt like it, and then sleeping for 20 hours was my depression. And that's as untrue of a statement as anything could possibly be. If you know what disorder causes that, you already know the answer. My son has it. He got it from me. You have to understand, back in 1997, there was only one group that was receiving a diagnosis of what we now know as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that was little boys, young little boys. Little girls were not really considered for that. Back then, we were just called ornery. And we needed to stop having sugar and stop having chocolate. And we would be just fine. And all of that was false. I can't even tell you the amount of times that I was told, you need to stop giving that girl sugar. You need to stop giving that girl chocolate. She's ornery. Yeah, it was ADHD from the very beginning, since I was really little. And unfortunately, it was not picked up because at the time, little girls were simply not being diagnosed with it. Even in the early 2000s, all I was seeing left and right were boys, 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 boys. Not one girl. Eventually, girls began being diagnosed with it. But it wasn't at the time I was diagnosed. They didn't have an answer. So the closest thing they could come up with did not fit all the symptoms. And if you look up bipolar 1 or ADHD, you'll see how close they are when it comes to symptoms. They're very close. Their symptoms are not that far off. The main difference between the two is the inattention, the inability to sleep, and the depression. I was able to sleep. I could sleep just fine. I just slept when I felt like it. My son does the same thing now. I have difficulty keeping him on a schedule because he loves to stay up for as long as he possibly can and then just sleep long hours. I would do the same thing. It's ADHD. And what they did after they diagnosed me with bipolar disorder was put me on bipolar medications. So we're talking about mood stabilizers. And those have devastating effects on your kidneys and liver. Absolutely devastating. You have to get blood work done every few months because it can absolutely destroy you. So they would put me on that. And then a few months later, they'd notice nothing had changed. They would say, none of her symptoms are improving. Nothing is going on. It's like she's the same girl 3 months ago. So instead of consider, maybe she doesn't have this diagnosis. No, they didn't. They said, let's up the medication. Let's see if that works. And then they would up it. And then that wouldn't work. And then they'd up it again. And that wouldn't work. Then they would change the medication. And change it again. And up it. And up it. And up it. And change it. And up it. Eventually, after about 2.5 years, they got to a combination of medications. There were 4 of them that knocked me out for 20 hours a day. And they considered that cured. I was cured because I couldn't speak or move or run away or do anything. I was sleeping 20 hours a day. And when I was up, I was drowsy and very out of it. And they considered that the cure. One of the medications that they gave me is one of the most harmful medications that exists. It is an antipsychotic medication that they prescribed for me off-label, as I did not have schizophrenia, nor did I have delusions, nor did I hear voices. I had no symptoms whatsoever of any delusion or psychosis. They gave me an antipsychotic because they figured it would knock me out. And that's what my mother wanted. My mother wanted me knocked out so that she wouldn't have to worry about me. Well, she got it. They had me on almost the full prescribable dose of this medication. 800 is the maximum dose. They had me on 600 per day. Most people, when they're given Seroquel to sleep, are given between 25 and 50 milligrams. I was given 600. Seroquel has a lot of very unusual and horrible side effects. One of them is that it damages your heart. It damages your temperature regulation. You stop being able to feel hot and cold appropriately. It can mess with your internal autoimmune system. Eventually, I ended up with thyroid disease, which turned into autoimmune Hashimoto's thyroid disorder. I now have to get scans of my thyroid once a year to check on the lesions that have developed because of the fact that my body is now trying to kill itself. This was not a thing prior to being on Seroquel. They don't have a cure or a treatment for Hashimoto's thyroiditis. They have only the ability to regulate your thyroid hormone, which has nothing to do with what I experience. And so even though my thyroid hormone is regulated, my symptoms are still here because they don't have symptoms that they can fix without an immune suppressant. And they're afraid to put me on an immune suppressant because they're worried that I would get very ill very fast. And that's a very genuine worry that I do not blame them for. One of the things that also happened, by the time I was 25, my teeth started to rot out of my mouth. I was told this is common for someone on Seroquel. Seroquel will destroy not only the teeth in your mouth, but the bones in your back because they are sensitive and they have a lot of nerve endings. So they will attack. This medication will destroy it little by little. They also said that for the teeth, the main issues were the medication itself, which causes a loss in bone density, which affects your spinal cord and your other bones, as well as the minerals in your bones will start to disintegrate. So it began with my teeth. Not to mention, this medication causes dry mouth, which causes tooth decay. And it will cause you to grind your teeth at night. That's another side effect. And if you grind your teeth long enough, you will grind the enamel coating right off of them. That's what I did. So the inside of my teeth were decaying from the medication. The medication was causing the dry mouth and me to grind my teeth. So by the time I was 25, my teeth started to rot. By the time I was 30, I had them replaced for the first time. These are not my teeth. I have not had teeth since I was in my 20s because of this medication. I have had my teeth replaced 3 times. These are the permanent ones. These aren't going anywhere. All because of a medication that I was put on by Big Pharma and the doctors, who did not consider a misdiagnosis even once, even though none of the medications worked to ease my symptoms. It also destroyed my back. My back is now in shambles. The entire lumbar section is destroyed. A lot of the other 2 parts, the thoracic and the cervical, have massive issues, herniations, tears, decaying bone. I have bone spurs in my upper neck. I have a lot of things going on, but my lumbar is destroyed to a point where the nerves in my legs have been so damaged that when I scratch my leg, it's an electric shock. Immediately. I feel an electric shock. I have had the EMG done on both of my legs, which has confirmed permanent nerve damage all the way down through my toes in both legs. I don't have stability on my legs. I am considered officially disabled, and I have a tendency to fall quite a bit because my lack of stability on my legs. So I have to be very careful all of the time. I fell not that long ago in February and ended up cracking 3 ribs because of the fall. My legs did not want to go as fast as my upper body, and I crashed. the signal just isn't there anymore. Now, when did I figure out that this might be an issue? My mid-20s. I noticed that I had moved out of my house at the age of 20. At the age of 20, my records stated that I was in remission from bipolar. I thought that was weird. How can you be in remission from bipolar? That's not cancer. What is bipolar remission? So I asked my doctor, and she said, well, there's not a remission. It's just we can't explain why you don't have any symptoms anymore. So we put in there that you are in remission. Okay, so I don't have any symptoms, and I haven't had symptoms since I was 20, which coincides with the time that I moved out of the house. That I moved out of my mother's house. That is when my symptoms all of a sudden just disappeared. And then I had said to her, does bipolar just disappear? And she said, not usually, no, I've never seen it. So this is the first time you're seeing bipolar just exist and then vanish without a trace. And she said, yes, that's why you're an interesting case. It did not even occur to her that it might be a misdiagnosis. Several years, several doctors later, the same thing. I kept asking the same questions, and they kept giving me the same answers. No, bipolar doesn't go into remission, but we have no other explanation. No, I've never seen a bipolar patient ever be symptomless. This is the first time I've ever seen it. Let me see how long you've been without symptoms. And they would see it had been a very, very long time, to the point where eventually I had been symptomless, completely absent of any symptoms whatsoever, for 3 times longer than I had been diagnosed. 3 times longer. Didn't even occur to anyone that this was a misdiagnosis. I complained all the time that all I could do was sleep. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't behave straight. I was sleeping all the time. And they said, that's your medication. By the time I was 36 years old, I did more digging. And I saw that ADHD actually made a lot more sense. And that back in the 90s, ADHD was often misdiagnosed as bipolar 1. Gee, that's weird. And so I brought this information to my doctor. And I said, don't you think it's weird that I never had depression? I had all of the symptoms that line up with ADHD, but only a few of the bipolar 1 symptoms. But they gave me a diagnosis of bipolar 1. My bipolar seems to have vanished into thin air 15 years ago, 16 years ago. So I had it for a few years, and then it just vanished and disappeared and hasn't been seen since. Coinciding with the time I moved out of my mother's house. And the doctor said, yes, that's suspicious. And I said, okay, good, we're on the same page. So I went off these medications. She fought me a little. But then she said, all right, we're going to do this one at a time, and we're going to do it slowly. And we're going to take you off the least dangerous first so that we see how you do. Okay, just get me off these things. It took about 6 months to get me off all 3, maybe a little longer. There has been no change. They were like, oh, you're going to go and have a manic episode. Oh, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. No, I just was able to think more clearly and stay awake for longer periods. And the more I went back with less and less medication in my system, and the more normal I was, without any bipolar symptoms whatsoever, they finally started to understand you were misdiagnosed. You have been given these medications that have now destroyed your teeth, destroyed your back, caused an autoimmune disorder, and now you're officially disabled for a misdiagnosis.